Welcome to the Heal, Thrive, Dream podcast, where trauma survivors become healthy thrivers. Each month, we'll feature a theme in the trauma recovery and empowerment field. To promote your recovery, healing, and learning how to build dreams, here's your host, Karen Robinson, transformational coach and therapist.
Welcome to the Heal, Thrive, Dream podcast. Our guest is Sherle Stevens. Did I got her name maybe right? Sherle?
Yes.
Sherle Stevens. Okay, yay. Sherle has written a novel that we're going to focus on today. In her empowering memoir, Sherle Stevens tells the story of a childhood spent with a critical mother and over 50 years of raising an angry daughter she could never reach. She explores the taboo of estrangement, the silent epidemic of suffering from unresolved family dynamics, bringing insight for finding healing to those who suffer in silence, secrecy, and shame. Wow. I'm so glad, Sherle, that you're here. And I want to say, like you described in this bio, an angry daughter, but when reading, I felt that she was pretty emotionally abusive as well. Does that resonate for you, those words, emotionally abusive?
Yes, absolutely. It felt abusive to me.
Yes. Yeah, it definitely seemed that way to me. And so I have worked with other women whose daughters have been this way, and sometimes sons, but you're the first author that I read that was able to describe it in such a way that I could feel it.
Oh, thank you.
So it was very powerful. Now, my first question is, I'm very puzzled by this because I'm such a whiny baby sometimes. Uh, the emotional pain and how you described that was so poignant in your book. But when you were hiking the trails in Spain, you weren't whining at all about physical pain. You didn't share about any sores, achy bones. You didn't share about blisters. Was it just because it was smoother for you, or you're just not a whiny baby about physical?
I didn't have any. First of all, after 3 days of carrying my pack, I found there was a minivan service and I could have the pack carried to the next hostel, which they call albergue. And so you have to have a guidebook when you're doing the Camino, or you would have no idea where you were going. And it's all so beautiful and extraordinary and expansive. And you're up and down, you're at the top of mountains and at the valleys and everything. So I had to gauge how far I could walk each day, and which was not a lot because it was hiking up and down mountains. So it wasn't just like a smooth path. So I had to gauge where I wanted the pack sent to. And every time except once, it was there when I arrived. And one time it was not picked up. And I had to take a taxi and go back to the place I'd been that I had just hiked from all day. And not all day. I was always done by noon. But the people that had blisters and broken knees and everything like that, those people were hiking like 30 kilometers a day. And they were doing it all day long, and then they'd be exhausted at night. By the time I got to the halfway point of the Camino, I saw people that were just miserable with those things. And I felt as free and healthy as a 12-year-old girl who had her book in her hand and knew where she was going. And so I was completely in bliss physically, and emotionally, it totally restored me.
It's amazing. So it sounds like you did it in a way that focused on your healing and weren't torturing yourself with the back.
Yes, absolutely. And I was 75. It was just right before my 75th birthday. And there are a lot of people in their 70s and even 80s there.
Yeah, that was very empowering to read about. Like, I thought it would be something that I would not entertain doing because I don't like to suffer anymore. But the way you wrote about it, I was like, oh, maybe it wasn't that bad. It's that, or she's not a complainer.
No, I'm a complainer. So I have a very low tolerance for pain, having suffered a lot of it. But no, but I would recommend anyone to go to on the line to go to American Pilgrims on the Camino. It's an incredible site, and you can read and see photographs of the gorgeous terrain and the other people are meeting along the way, and you'll see that people are doing this 4 and 5 and 6 times. They just keep going back and back because it's very daunting. I'm not even athletic in the slightest. I trained for a year to be able to do it even. And after I did it, I became not athletic again. So it doesn't require being athletic, but you do need to train to be able to do it, to be able to have the stamina and the legs to do it.
Yes. Yeah. I was really glad to see that you had trained. I'm sure that made a huge difference.
And I
So,
recommend everybody do it by themselves alone, because then you're in the full of the experience.
yeah, because I can imagine that it's hard to process emotional pain and doing the praying that you did and the reflection that you did if you had somebody else there to chat with, right?
Oh yeah. It would just be like a girlfriend trip or a husband and wife trip or whatever. It would be a totally different energy.
Yeah. I do know of a mother-daughter who did it, and it did them do a little deeper connection on their relationship. Now, I wouldn't recommend you do that with your daughter, of course. Yeah, they just had a few little things to iron out that seemed to help them. But I think if I ever choose to do this, I would do it alone too, because I love the idea of the praying and the reflection you did. I think that was beautiful.
Oh,
And you must have
and
felt like such a badass after you did that.
totally. Absolutely. I still do. And when I walked into a room where a good friend was waiting to see me afterward when I was back home, and she just went like this. She just did a double take because she said, "My God, the power, the energy you're carrying." It was like palpable. And I could feel it too. And I still do. I still carry that with me. Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like we jumped ahead to 65 years into your story. So let's
Oh,
go
that's
jump back.
okay.
Let's jump around here, see how
I
this
could
goes.
always talk about the Camino for hours and days. Yeah.
Yes. I wanted the readers to know that you do talk about it in your book. That's one of my favorite parts. And so tell us a little bit about your mom, like how the relationship was briefly in childhood and what it took to kind of let, if you had, it seemed like reading it that you had let go of the pain and that you were able to have some compassion for her and what she has gone through. Can you just share a little bit about that experience?
Sure. I always felt she was so critical. And when I was really little, she switched me. I don't even know if people know what switching is now. I
I
haven't
do.
heard that word in a long time, but she would go out into the yard and get green branches from a bush and switch my legs. And I was so terrified of that and her. And I can't remember doing anything that would have accounted for that kind of a whipping. And
There's nothing.
there isn't. And I just
Yeah.
remember crying and saying, "Please don't hit me. I'll be good. Please don't hit me. I'll be good." And then she would stop. And I don't remember her yelling at me or anything. It wasn't like she was screaming or saying horrible things to me. No. And then she was just very critical, but she also did so many wonderful things for me. And I thought of that I had the best parents. When I would see my friends' parents when I was a child growing up, and I would think I had the best ones. They were intelligent, they were kind, they were compassionate people. And it was just that she was always on me about something. It wasn't
Yeah.
but she also made sure I had, because she was the one that was the primary caregiver. My father was always at work and I didn't see him in the evenings. But I always thought he was my good parent. He was the kind one that really loved me. But my mother would say she loved me, and it wasn't like there were things could have been much, much worse. But I did grow up feeling not good enough because I always felt criticized. But at the end of my book, in the epilogue, that first part where I was in the waiting room at the doctor's office, and suddenly I'd never been afraid of going to the doctor, but this particular physician's assistant had injured me in a gynecological exam like several months before. And not only had she done that, but the hospital group that was over that kept saying, we want your feedback, we want your feedback. And after 3 emails, I finally gave them my feedback, thinking I didn't have to see her again. And then I found out I did have to see her again. So then I was really nervous going in. First, that she might injure me again, and then also that she might be angry because I turned that in. She wasn't. She was gentle. She acted like she'd never met me before. But before I got in there, in the waiting room, which was empty, I suddenly remembered being with my mother toward the end of her life when she wanted me to come to Michigan from Texas to go to the doctor with her, and that she was terrified. And suddenly, in that instant, I just had a chilling experience where for just a nanosecond, I felt like I was my mother experiencing that fear. And in that instant that I had that feeling, all the love that I wanted to pour out to her just filled me. And I said, oh, Mommy, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. You never told anyone your secrets. And and you just took care of everything. You cooked wonderful meals for us. You paid the bills. You ran the household. Our home was always clean and beautiful. And you gave me all those private lessons in art and swimming and acting and just music, everything. And anyway, I had a totally different feeling. It was a healing experience about my mother. Yeah, it was extraordinary.
Yeah, and also very well written again. Yeah, it's interesting because sometimes when we don't feel love, it's hard to believe that we are loved. And it was clear to me that she did love you. It was just from her traumatized. She was a trauma survivor as well,
Absolutely.
and didn't have the great tools to express her love. Yeah, and it's not excuse the switching and all that. Of course, it's not to excuse her when she was critical, but. Yeah, you did a really wonderful job of sharing that story with your readers. And you mentioned something very critical that a lot of trauma survivors, when they're going through abuse, especially in their childhood home, we end up having that belief that we're not good enough. And I believe that belief leads us to finding love in all the wrong places. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Sounds like you've read my book. It sounds like you've heard my stories. Yes, I did. I did, especially because I was so hungry for adventure. I was raised on all those beautiful movie musicals of the 1940s and 50s. And they just inspired me to go out into the world and first of all find people that were not critical and that would hug me and kiss me, and there would be music and romance. And so that really made me search for that. And so the first fascinating boy that came along, I jumped on literally that ship.
That ship, yeah. Yeah, I loved reading about your adventures and all the facets of New York that show up in your book too. So we don't want to give too much away to the potential readers, but I really hope they pick up your book. And I know you wanted to read I know you wanted to read something from your book today. Maybe go ahead and do that, and then I will ask follow-up questions about that.
What is there a particular place I'm trying to think of?
If there's something about your romantic adventures you want to share, or something about Grace, your loving partner, or about whatever you feel moved to call, maybe just one section.
You know what I would love to do? I was thinking that I had some things here to read, but they were really not necessarily set aside for that, but just to remind me of something. But what I would to talk about is the love of a woman that is not sexual, that's great too for people that feel that. But this has been the most extraordinary relationship of my life because it's something that I remember hearing people talk about years ago called a Boston marriage, where it's just a deep love you have for someone, that is the same sex, but it's not necessarily sexual. It could be if it was somebody could have a Boston marriage that was, but it's just a soul experience for me. And that's when I realized when I was doing Grace's numerology and the first three numbers that are so important matched mine. I was like, and that's the first time I actually felt like I heard a voice in my head saying, pay attention. This woman is so important in your life. And she's been such a healing for my heart. It's just, but anyway, I just wanted to encourage women, if they are, to see that the spectrum of love can be bigger than what we've always grown up with, a Cinderella story. That if you have been injured in marriages or relationships with men, that there is an option to just love someone for who they are and be nourished by that love.
Yeah.
If you,
a lot, even my friends who don't consider themselves gay or bisexual, a lot of my female friends say it would be just so great to have a wife.
it is, it is in so many ways. I was thinking, was there any place that you can think of that you would like me to read from?
I think you have a very funny voice too. So if you have something that's dog-eared about any of your romantic or adventures, that I think that's interesting.
I was going to say I could read about the time that Jack came back to the boat and found me reading the ship's log. And
okay,
then,
yeah, let's do
does
that.
that sound good? Okay.
Yeah, but before you do that, before you read that, I wanted to share a quote that you've said a couple times in the book that you got from Instagram, because I think it plays into the feeling of not good enough or the belief of not good enough. But it answers the questions like, why do we stay in relationships that we know that aren't healthy? And you hit it out of the park when you said abuse can't succeed without occasional acts of kindness.
Wasn't that the best?
Uh,
I was blown away by finding that. And it's just
Powerful.
like, talk about the lights go on in the room.
Yes.
And that's how they get away with it, especially those narcissists.
Especially like those lunchtime adventures sounded really fun. He was kind and passionate, and it's interesting how that can just turn. Yeah.
That was the second bad one. That was the second narcissist that was so clever that I didn't even see it coming. The first one I had feelings about, but I wanted the adventures that he was capable of having.
Go ahead and read what you have for us.
All right, so here's the first bad guy. So we're married and we're living on a sailboat in England, a small one, and I'm pregnant. The next 4 months were awful. My morning sickness was so intense all day and evening long that the only things I could keep down were soda crackers and strawberries. And Paul, who was a friend of my husband's, Paul was kind enough to keep me supplied with both. I saw very little of Jack, my husband. He was either working or on some of the boat's rigging, mending sails, or drinking at the pub. One afternoon, Jack and Paul had gotten a lift from a neighbor who had taken them into the next town to get a piece of equipment needed for the boat. Trying to forget about my upset stomach, I was looking around for something to read. There were some paperback books, but none of them looked particularly interesting. I kept poking around and found a heavy book with a waterproof cover tucked under some papers on a small shelf. I took it out and saw the title, Ship's Log, Cutlass. That was the name of the boat. Oslo, Norway, 1961. Thinking this was probably just a technical record Paul had made on their trip from Oslo to Holland, with notations about the weather, the wind, and the measurements taken with his sextant, I started to slide it back onto the shelf. But then for some reason, I decided to open it. Jack had written in locker room sexual detail about an affair he'd been having with a Danish girl he'd met in Oslo, who'd come along with him on this sail to Holland. She'd stayed the past 6 months with him there too, and he'd been having the time of his life with her. So this was why he'd lied to me, delaying me, telling me that there had been a fire on board and asking me to send him all the money I'd saved, then telling me I couldn't come until I could bring even more. I felt sick. It got worse. He wrote that Ellie had tried to kill herself when she realized I was coming after all, and he was dumping her. He noted how well he'd clean up the mess after she slit her wrists. First, taking her to a doctor to get bandaged up, and then putting her on a train back to her parents in Copenhagen. I could see that he'd chosen me because I had some money coming for him. Ellie might have been great in the bunk, but she didn't have funds. It was all there. She didn't care. He didn't care about either of us. Suddenly, I heard the sound of Jack's boots hitting the deck. He came below and saw me sitting there with the ship's log open on the table. "What the hell are you doing with that?" he screamed. "That's none of your business. That ship's log is only for the captain to touch, and that captain is me. Give it to me now, and don't you ever touch it again." He tried to make me the villain for reading the ship's log, as if that were the wrong action here, not his infidelity or her broken heart. It was such a familiar manipulation from him, but this time I didn't buy it. Now, how was I going to keep making the best of it?
Yeah, my heart broke for you because I had gotten to know you a bit through the story at this point, and for the other woman, young lady as well.
Oh, I know. Mine too.
Yeah. Whew.
I know. But there are happy things in the book, lots of happy things too.
There are lots of happy things. Tell me, what was the most powerful healing tool that helped you the most or empowered you the most during your healing journey? Like for me, one of the most healing things for me has been books and reading. I think we have that in common a little bit.
Absolutely. I love to read. I love to read. In fact, my adventurous spirit took hold when I had my very first book of poetry, Robert Louis Stevenson's Child's Garden of Verses. And I remember there was a little girl, and it was a little painting next to the poem, a little girl with pigtails like mine. And she was in a swing, and I loved to swing. And she was swinging high so she could see over the garden wall. And far in the distance was a city. And the poem was, "I'm sure we should all be as happy as kings. The world is so full of a number of things. I'm sure we should all be as happy as kings." That was it. And so I had to go find them. Between that and all the movies that inspired me, I just had to go. But the thing that inspired me and helped me heal was I became a seeker very early in my life because I was always looking for answers. And when I was 3 or 4 years old, that's when I told myself I had to memorize what was happening because I knew something was happening to me, abuse, at the same time as I was being so well cared for. I had the best medical and dental care and all the classes and everything, but still, that was what was confusing, actually.
Right. And mixed messages.
Mixed messages. Okay, this is the part about being 86. That's hard where I.
No, you're good.
I
we're
interrupt
talking
myself, but yeah. Okay, so what helped me was being a seeker. I was always looking for answers. And so I was a natural for therapy. I couldn't wait to have therapy. But even way before that, when my daughter was only 22 months old, the most extraordinary experience to this day that I think I've ever had was when I was brushing her hair and we were quiet. She had her back to me. I was brushing the back of her hair and it was long and fine. And she suddenly said, "I remember being born." And I remembered in this little booklet I'd gotten in England, it said at the very end of the booklet, sometimes children remember being born. They might say I was cold or it was dark. And I thought, this is true that children can remember. And so I wanted to turn around and go, oh my gosh, what? But there was something so eerie also about the fact that even though it sounded like her voice, it was not at all her speech pattern at 22 months old. And so I just kept, as quietly as I could, I said, what was it like? And she said, in one sentence without pause, as matter of factly as anything, We were standing in line behind God, waiting for our turn. And to me, that was the greatest gift of all. And it's from then on, I was definitely looking for answers I couldn't find in Sunday school. Yeah. And that's what led to healing, to finding teachers. Yeah.
Yeah, because it looked like you looked at generational healing, that intergenerational trauma piece as well. Yeah, so it's all extremely powerful. But I know you had some book recommendations for us. Do you want to share those now?
Yes, I do. Yes. The person that I came across, of course, by accident, while I was looking at another book on Amazon, and there was a string of other books down there. Difficult Mothers, Adult Daughters by Karen C.L. Anderson. This book shifted everything for me about my relationship with my daughter. And for the first time ever, I could see our relationship from her perspective, or what I thought must have been her perspective. She would never tell me what was wrong. That was the part that was so hard for me. I couldn't fix what I didn't understand, why she was so angry. And then Karen C.L. Anderson also has this journal, the Difficult Mother-Daughter Relationship Journal. And both of these are on Amazon, of course. And it's interesting that I want to read the subtitle to Difficult Mothers, Adult Daughters, a guide for separation, liberation, and inspiration. So she's not saying you have to separate, but if you want to, this may liberate you and inspire you. She's covered any way you want to do this. And the journal says a guide for revealing and healing toxic generational patterns. And then she's also written this book, You Are Not Your Mother, Releasing Generational Trauma and Shame. And all of these books that's what changed my book from where I thought it had ended. But since I was delayed with COVID and everything into doing my second draft of my book, during that time I found these books, and that's what really healed me. And then there are two other books that I read during the time I was writing. This one for mothers of difficult daughters. So this is told from the mother's perspective. And this book's 25 years old. She says how to enrich and repair the relationship in adulthood. And this is written by a therapist, Dr. Charney Hurst. And she talks about 3 different kinds of daughters: the dependent, the dissatisfied, and the distant daughter. And then at the very end of the book, there were just a couple of pages, and she said, gee, I wrote this book a year ago, and she said, I was on a year book tour, and I met a 4th kind. And let me make sure I use the right word that she used. And she said she'd seen this type in her practice, but she didn't realize how common it was. And this is the disturbed daughter.
Wow.
And so I found this book very helpful too. And then there's one more book that I came across, Shadow Daughter, a memoir of estrangement by Harriet Brown.
Shadow Daughter, Harriet Brown.
And then shortly after I got my book published in September, I came across an enormous article in the New Yorker about the cancel, I guess, part of the cancel culture, maybe you would say. The epidemic of young women who have just blocked and estranged themselves from their mothers without any words. And I mentioned it to my publisher, who's in her mid-50s, and she said, oh yes, because now that anybody can just hit block, so that this is even more rampant than I believed. So I think of it as mostly the mothers who are suffering, but I can't help but believe the daughters are suffering in their own way. So
sure.
what I describe as finding a third way other than just cutting it off, which I did. And so my daughter and I both cut it off. And at that point in my book where I said I was done, and I just said that silently into the ethers, but I was clear. But I never heard from her again either. She was done at that same moment. I know. But
it was such a bittersweet thing to read. It was heartbreaking yet freeing to be
it was
gone.
totally freeing. And I really, with all my heart, wanted to free her too. And I felt that I did everything I could to free her. And I felt that her response said that she was free.
Yeah, I agree. That was really powerful. We went around the world in our discussion. So I want to hold up your book because you talked about everybody else's book, but it's called Big as the Whole Wide World, Finding Peace Beyond My Karmic Family Ties. So readers, I highly recommend it. I read it myself. I'm writing a review. It's a very well put together book. You can feel both the pain and the joy in Sherle's story. So beautiful work, Sherle.
Thank you so much, Karen. I so appreciate it. I want everybody to know that I have never felt happier in my life and more at peace. And it's the first time I haven't had an abusive relationship, really, in my life. And it's what an extraordinary difference it makes to feel at peace. And the other big surprise for me was that this book was my work in the world. I always thought it was my art or my numerology readings, which I'm still doing, by the way. So yeah, that website still works, and yeah, I love to do that. For me, numerology I focus more on who the person is and why they're here, not just what's going to happen to me, kind of thing. So I love doing that. But the book was the most important.
Yes, I think it's definitely a gift. It's only 5 o'clock here and it's getting darker and darker. And I have lights on, like little lamps.
I know you look like you've got a flashlight on you.
I know this is not ideal podcast quality. Our content is great, so people are going to overlook the quality
of
of my
course.
side. Yes.
Wow.
So thank you, Sherle, for being a guest with us. We will have your sites on the show notes for people to find you. We'll have your book links, both of your books, for people to purchase. And thank you again for being here.
Thank you so much, Karen. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you for listening in today. Please join us next week, same day and time. Also, I would love for you to check out my website, healthrivedream.com.